Is loneliness fueling the rise of political polarization in the U.S.? By Abigail Hurst. While browsing through a recently discovered bookstore, I stumbled across a book titled Republican Like Me, How I Left the Liberal Bubble and Learned to Love the Right by Ken Stern. Finding the title intriguing, I opened the book and began reading about his experience breaking out of the political bubble and experiencing life on the other side. One of Stern's points centers on tribalism, a term describing the identity politics and the us versus them mentality prevalent in modern culture, particularly since the 2016 elections. Such tribalism is driven by many things, but fear is a major factor. Clearly, people on both sides of the political spectrum are scared, each thinking that the other is a threat to their very way of life. Yet, while each party feels some threat from the other side, does American fear stem from something deeper than political leaders? Hannah Arendt, and a German-American philosopher, spent time tracing the demise of a nation to totalitarianism in her book, The Origins of Totalitarianism. What I find most fascinating in this book is the connection she draws between loneliness and fear. Loneliness, she argues, has serious consequences. What makes loneliness so unbearable is the loss of one's own self, which can be realized in solitude, but confirmed in its identity only by the trusting and trustworthy companion of my equals. In this situation, man loses his trust in himself as the partner of his thoughts, and that elementary confidence in the world which is necessary to make experiences at all. Self and world, capacity for thought, and experience are lost at the same time. In other words, loneliness is harmful to individuals, not because it's merely unpleasant, but because it leads to a loss of self-identity and consequently a real view of the world. Furthermore, if a person does not have some idea of who they are, they will not be able to make sense of the world around them and will ultimately become confused, fearful, and unable to function. So they must choose something to identify themselves with if they want to make sense of the world at all and attain some level of inner security. With depression rates rising and nearly half of Americans feeling alone, it's clear that an epidemic of loneliness is upon us. Could this loneliness have the same effect on America that Arendt hence suggested, namely the loss of self and world? This seems possible. Many individuals no longer have the communal and social connections they once had, such as religion, ethnic culture, and family. The only connection many have left is their political party, and that forms their identity. And because the closeness this has to their identity, they become more tribal and defensive when that party is attacked. Today, we see a great fear between the opposing political parties. Does this fear come simply from the actions of both parties, or is there a greater loneliness and loss of personal identity at play? The politics of loneliness is totalitarian. What Hannah Arendt would say about all the lonely people. Friendlessness is on the rise, and so, one must presume, is loneliness. That's the troubling takeaway from a study released last week by the Survey Center on American Life. That shows the number of both men and women who claim to have no close friends increasing fivefold over the past 30 years. For men, the rate of friendlessness has gone from 3% in 1990 to 15% in 2021, and for women from 2% to 10% today. The pattern is the same on the high end, with the percentage of men saying they have 10 or more friends dropping from 40 to 15%, and the percentage of women saying the same falling from 28 to 11%. However you cut it, this is bad. It's bad for the lonely, isolated individuals themselves, because having close ties to other people is strongly correlated with various markers of physical and mental health. Without such ties, individuals tend to grow unhappy and unhealthy and can even sink into depression. But it's also a bad sign for our country and society, culture, and economy, since it could mean we're developing in a direction that will make more of us lonelier and more isolated. This is bound to lead to deep and increasingly widespread discontent with our way of life. And that brings us to the most ominous thing of all about rising rates of friendlessness. It provides a potent, if probably only partial, sociological explanation for why our politics have become much more polarized in recent decades, with increasing numbers of people attracted to more radical forms of political dissent on both the right and the left. It also should suggest that if the loneliness and isolation become worse, so could our political pathologies. Human beings are social, communal creatures. We seek out connection with others of our kind, and especially enjoy engaging in common enterprises and emotional intimacy that can follow from such experiences. The standard way for people to have these kinds of collective experiences is out in the world, in extended family, local community, religious organizations, work, unions, clubs, and politics. The fact that friendlessness is on the rise seems to be a function, in part, of the wasting away of these intermediary institutions in civil society. Families are smaller than they used to be, and fewer people marry in the first place. Communities are fraying under economic pressures and a result of social shifts. Fewer people go to church. Work more often involves analysis of symbols, ideas, and numbers, and take place mostly within our own heads, mediated by technology, with remote work also becoming more common in recent years. Unions are a shadow of what they once were. We've been bowling alone for decades. All of this can make it harder to forge friendships, at least in the real world. The rise of the internet, especially social media, has opened up other possibilities for social interaction, if not exactly friendships. People sharing similar interests, hobbies, quirks, and obsessions can easily find each other online and enjoy a digital facsimile of friendship with others. These virtual friend communities are more like collective groups of topic-specific pen pals than real-world friendships. The latter are marked by both physical closeness, involving handshakes, hugs, back slaps, shared meals and drinks, and all the intimacy that accompanies them, and the possibility of holistic self-exposure beyond the specific endeavor that initially brought the friends together. Whether you and your friend originally became close playing or watching sports, shopping, or participating in a book club, the foundation can open up the possibility of a deeper or broader sharing of memories, thoughts, hopes, and fears. Here's the full stories of our lives. Online relationships are different. A modicum of that closeness might be achieved by some, taking the edge off the pain and loneliness of a life without friends. But for most, the interaction will tend to remain topic specific, and for nearly all, the interaction will be entirely mental. A friendship, or love affair for that matter, conducted completely online, takes place wholly within the minds of the participants, with imagination playing a vastly greater role than it would in the real world. There's one reason why the quirks and obsessions that draw people to specific websites, chat rooms, Facebook groups, and Twitter threads often lead those clusters become quirkier and more obsessive over time, lacking any need to test ideas against the hard limits and constraints, hence that obtain in the physical world. Ideas can run wild in the minds of participants in an online conversation or debate. This is especially so when it comes to politics. It's one thing to keep an online community together based on a common love of Star Trek, or Taylor Swift, or NBA basketball, or whatever. It's quite another root in common hatred, antagonism to outgroups, groups to add cohesion to any collective. Add in the high ideals and impulse toward noble sacrifice that political discussion tends to call forth in those who participate in it, and we're left with a very potent form of online association, one that can grant its members more fulfillment and satisfaction than any other kind. A notion of increasingly lonely, friendless citizens given outlets to find collective, communal fulfillment online will be a nation spawning a range of radical political factions, groups or movements defined by and drawing the bulk of their cohesion from their loathing of other factions, groups, or movements. The list of potential enemies is long: billionaires, black people, white women, and Republicans, Trump supporters, immigrants, liberals, Muslims, socialists, Jews, communists, fascists. For many, this collective hatred will remain in the mind, like a virtual reality political shooter game. But because the hatreds concern the real world, and the people engaged in such collective antagonism actually exist in that world, there's always a risk of radicalism spilling out into the country itself, as we saw on January 6th. One political thinker who would have been thoroughly unsurprised about these developments is Hannah Arendt, the great analyst and theoretician of totalitarianism. In her view, totalitarianism is a novel form of government for which the men and women of modern Europe was prepared by the fact that loneliness had become an everyday experience for so many. The all-pervasive system the totalitarian regime promised, and for a time provided, an all-encompassing orientation, meaning, and purpose for the masses that they otherwise lacked and craved in their lives. Where our situation differs from the totalitarian systems of the mid-20th century were exemplars for Arendt is that they are deeply, perhaps hopelessly divided. No part of our nation can hope to provide the whole with unifying, galvanizing purpose to liberate us from our loneliness. Instead, each faction has forged its own world online. That points in another direction towards increasing centrifugal forces, rising factional polarization, and the growing risk of additional events like the insurrection on Capitol Hill nearly 6 months ago. It might seem strange that the absence of friendship in the lives of individual men and women could be paving the way for the gravest forms of political misfortune, but human beings have needs that can only be described as spiritual. Loneliness can be intolerable, so much that even the most toxic forms of political association begin to look like a godsend. I decided to showcase these two articles because I couldn't find a satisfactory video about the connection between loneliness and totalitarianism elsewhere. I was driven to do this with me creating the articles and making the video versions of the following. My article on Decadence, hence on anti-war, or Substack. Heck, a message is to Christian Nationalists, Fundamentalists, Paleoconservatives, and Traditional Conservatives, and how to fight Christian nationalism and how to fight the Christian right. It's on libertarian resources and content aggregation at Substack. Thank you for listening.